The Miami Dolphins 2024 schedule has been well established for months now, but we're looking at things through a different light here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. The Dolphins coming off of joint practices against the Washington Commanders yesterday. One and done for the joint practices. Preseason game tomorrow, so we got a little bit of a lull in between the joint and the preseason game itself. To be determined who is going to play amongst the starters. Credit Washington. They came out hot offensively. Miami down a couple of key guys, but you get to go out there and perform with who you got. The Dolphins in the joint practice yesterday. Jayden Daniels, a very successful red zone period. Sounded like the team bounced back really well. You got into some other team situations, and the pass rush really heated them up. The Dolphins created several turnovers in practice off of Daniels, including kind of a cool subplot and storyline is Kendall Fuller wears the orange jersey against his former team, and on the last play of practice gets an interception in a simulated team setting. So that's fun. And we'll see who gets a chance to go tomorrow in the preseason game. I didn't think there'd be a lot of value me speculating with us not knowing really who's going to suit up and who's not. So we'll just react to the game after it happens. In the same way that I wanted to touch base on the joint practice, but me not being there and not really getting a chance to talk to some of the people that I would usually talk to help give me the right perspective on practice. Didn't think my time with you would be best spent trying to piece together the right talking points out of something that I didn't see, and I didn't get to get the soundboard off of anybody who was there. So instead, we're doing one of the big shows from last year that everybody really enjoyed. I've been getting asked, Kyle, when are you doing this for the 2024 season? Today's the day. It's your lucky day. If you've been asking, looking at the schedule through a little bit of a different light. Obviously, who you play and the order in which you play them, it can help push things for or against your favor in your likelihood to win a football game. And you also have quality of teams to account for. And when I did this for the Dolphins last year, you looked at layups, games that you should win. I think I also kind of just broke out the division and said the fastest track to winning your division or to winning enough games to make the playoffs is to win your division. The way you do that is you win division games, right? Dolphins won 4 division games last year. They needed 5, or they needed 4 and a different 4 than what they got. So I decided to kind of do away with the divisional narrative and instead look at games that you as a Dolphins fan know that if the Dolphins lose one of the games in bucket X on the schedule, it hurts a lot because you were really banking on that one being a win. If they lose a game in bucket Y, it kind of hurts, but you got wiggle room, at least early in the schedule, amongst those games. You're going to have to make up the ground later. And then you've got a collection of games that I have that I think if you take care of business in the other areas of the schedule, what you do in the a la carte bucket of games is really going to determine whether or not you're a wild card team, whether you're playing at home or you're a really high seed, or you're sitting at home if you completely flop in that bucket altogether. So it's almost like confidence points looking at games on the schedule. And case in point, the Dolphins, we mentioned they won 4 division games last year, and one of the ones they lost was a game in Week 18 that they needed to get to 12 wins. But if they'd won a different game somewhere else, maybe they would have not needed that Week 18 game. So theoretically, if you would have not lost a game that we had labeled at the beginning of the year as a layup, and that you were up 14 points in the final 5 minutes of that game, I think that's why a lot of people felt it. It was not just a monumental collapse, but it was the understanding of this is a game you were banking on having based on what that team was supposed to be. And sure enough, they picked in the top 10 and you still dropped the game. Spoiler alert, Tennessee not in the layup bucket this year. Will not do that again. There are a few games that I consider to be layups on the schedule, games that you should win. There's 3. And I think that's good news for the rest of the schedule. Last year, there were 4 games. The Dolphins went 3-1 in those layup games, and the one that they lost cost them dearly at the end of the year. I think the less layup games you have that you're banking on, obviously you'd like to have a few games that you have a very high confidence that you're going to win. But even the games that you should win bucket, it's a healthy group this year. There's 6 games in that bucket. So layups, 3. Games you should win, 6. That's at 9. So the a la carte's really going to determine how high in the pecking order you get in potential playoff field. So let's start with these layup games. Who are they? The first 2 are games that were played against the team, or are games that are played against the team that played last night. The New England Patriots are going to not be a very competitive football team this year. And the Dolphins have had success against New England as of late. That success needs to continue. If you drop a game that you shouldn't to New England this year, shame on you as the Dolphins. And it will dearly hurt your outlook unless you really kick butt in the a la carte area of your schedule. But at New England, you play that one first. It's not a cold weather game. And then you get New England later in the year, I think around week 10 or 11, and that one is at home. Between the coaching staff changes, the offensive system changes, they just traded Matt Judon. They have a health issue with Christian Barmore, who's their other best defensive lineman, who's kind of MIA with blood clots, and you hope to see him back on the field as soon as possible. But his absence hurts that team significantly. You're potentially looking at Jacoby Brissett starting the first game. That's a week 5 game. Those are games you as the Dolphins fan base, you should expect your team to win both games against New England. Like to the point where I would consider them layup games on the schedule, as much of a layup game as there is in the NFL. And if you don't show up on any given week, you will lose. Case in point, what happened last year in a layup game against a team that picked in the top 10. But there's enough questions with New England. There's enough talent disparity. And then where each team is respectively at, you look at those 2 games and then you acknowledge the team has had success against New England recently. And you say, you should win those 2 games. Not only should you win those 2 games, you should expect to win those 2 games. The only other game I have on the schedule that I consider to be in the layup category as a game that would really hurt if you lose it is the Arizona Cardinals. And the reason why is you look at the talent that Arizona has to come, their West Coast team coming east for an early kick. Home field advantage, time change advantage, talent disparity. This team has drafted a ton of players. They get a lot of young players. They have a talented quarterback in Kyler Murray. But Kyler Murray, largely where he wins is extended plays and outside the numbers and down the field. He's not a big middle of the field target area. Where's Miami's biggest weakness been from a defense perspective? And they've tried to address it this offseason. They've gotten hurt by backs and tight ends and slot receivers over the middle of the field. So you take that element with a really young roster, a team that wants to run the ball. And if you want to run the ball, and if the team is able to put up points against you, like we expect Miami is going to be capable of doing, what does that mean for your game script? Doesn't give you a large margin for error. And if you just acknowledge who the Cardinals have on their depth chart right now, defensively, the starting depth chart: Bilal Nichols, Roy Lopez, Justin Jones, Dennis Gardeck, Kaiser White, Mac Wilson, Zaven Collins, Sean Murphy, Bunting, Buda Baker, Jalen Thompson, Maxim Melton, Garrett Williams. Other prominent rookies on the 2 deep first-round pick: Darius Robinson, 3rd-round pick Elijah Jones, 4th-round pick Adrian Taylor Demerson. It's a lot of youth, and it's a lot of inexperience, and it's it's a roster that is probably another year, foundational year away from kind of really turning the corner. You get a game like that on the schedule at home. They're coming several time zones across to come play at your house. That you got to win that game. And that's kind of where the first part of the schedule stands as it pertains to the Dolphins. Now, the rest of the schedule, we're going to get into that next, including games that you look at the dynamics between the two teams and you say, hey, they should win that game. If they sweep that bucket, you're going to feel really good about what the outlook looks like for the a la carte portion of the schedule that's next here on Locked On Dolphins. NFL season is here, and perhaps you want to get a chance to head down to the stadium and catch the Dolphins play at Hard Rock Stadium. Get your tickets through Gametime. Gametime, where you can save up to 60% off last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They have flash and zone deals to help you maximize your savings. They have all-in pricing so that you can see the total cost of your tickets, no surprise fees when you put the tickets into your cart. You get panoramic seat views from your seat so you know what you're signing yourself up for before you buy your tickets, and a Gametime guarantee where if you find lower cost tickets in the same row and section for less somewhere else, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets with the lowest prices guaranteed. Games that the Dolphins should win. And if you told me they win 5 out of 6 here, you say, okay. That still gives you a lot of wiggle room with a la carte. You win 4 out of 6, it's probably the least comfortable I would be. If you win all 6, that'd give you 9 games if you take care of your layup games. So I would say at minimum, you need 3/4 of these games to feel on schedule for where you want to be as a football team. And they're not easy games. Now, most of them are at home. There's 4 home games and 2 road games that are in this. You look at where you expect both these teams to be right now, and you should win the game. I've got Jacksonville week 1 in this bucket. That's not to say they're going to win the game, but I think Miami at home, with the track record of what Mike McDaniel has been able to put out in early season showings with having new wrinkles, going against Jacksonville with a new defensive coordinator, with a team that has kind of reworked a lot of the targets for Trevor Lawrence, where Miami has a little bit more continuity on the offensive side of the ball. They're going to be a little bit more pressure-oriented. Jacksonville's offensive line. Miami's offensive line didn't perform particularly well in the pass rush metrics or pass protection metrics last year anyway, but their scheme kind of builds around that. Jacksonville also did not fare well in the pass rush protection metrics, and I think the Dolphins offense provides a little bit more wiggle room in the way of scheming around pressure. You should win that game at home. Season opener. Fans should be fired up. At Seattle, week 3. And a lot of this for me stems from uncertainty with their offensive line group, a new offensive system as a whole, which maybe takes away from some of the fortitude of Geno Smith being an established starter there. So it kind of creates multiple questions on offense. Miami has extra rest coming into this game, even though they're going to the West Coast, because they play on Thursday the week before in week 2. And then defensively, there's a lot of familiarity. I think Miami practicing against Anthony Weaver's defense will help them be prepared for playing against Mike McDonald's defense for the Seahawks. I look at that game on the schedule week 3 and I say, hey, that's a game I think you should win. Tennessee, I would consider to be in this bucket. Again, a lot of new wholesale coaching staff changes, wholesale roster changes for Tennessee. You are at home. There is a revenge factor that I promise you. You think about the 2022 revenge game against the Chargers, the Brandon Staley game, and the storyline that carried into the season 1 opener, or the week 1 season opener last year in 2023. And Tua throws for all the yards and all the touchdowns, and Miami scores all the points and wins the game. I think that element is going to very much be real again this year. And you kind of have seen Mike McDaniel in some of the glimpses behind the curtain, be very transparent with his team and taking that kind of stuff head on. So I think Miami has more high-end talent. I think Miami is a little further ahead. They have a rookie coach with a second-year quarterback that is largely an unknown factor. Go ahead, put me. They don't have Derrick Henry, which is nice. So go ahead and put me down. I consider that to be a game that you should win. And a reminder, at minimum, the Dolphins need to win 2 out of every 3 of these games. So the first 3 on the schedule are in the first 4 weeks. So at minimum, if you're looking at 2-2, depending on where the wins come in the first 4 weeks, that could potentially be on schedule. You'd like to be ahead of that pace if you're going to really exceed expectations this year. The next game I have down at Indianapolis, you're coming off of a bye. You have an early bye this year. You got to go to Indy. Their offense going to be very run-oriented, much like Arizona. Got Anthony Richardson, a quarterback that can run the ball. Have Jonathan Taylor, obviously, with the explosive plays that he's able to create. But the big question with Indianapolis is their secondary. The guys that they have in the secondary, the Colts fans have been begging their team to add either Quandre Diggs or Justin Simmons, both of those players off the market now. Simmons signs in Atlanta. And a secondary for Indianapolis that has second-year corners Juju Brents and Jalen Jones projected as starters. Kenny Moore in the nickel's a great player. But then Nick Cross and Julian Blackmon. Blackmon's a good player too. But that secondary, and they've lost Samson Ebukam for the year already defensively. I feel like that has enough matchups for Miami coming off of a bye. You should expect to have success in that game. Raiders at home. There's a quarterback disparity there. Raiders are tough out. They're not going to be an easy team defensively to have success against, between Christian Wilkins being added to Max Crosby. They got some really physical guys on the back end and the back seven. Their linebackers can really thump. But I do think Miami's speed can test them. And you're at home. It's another West Coast team that's coming east for an early game. And the quarterback situation's the grand mystery there with the Raiders. Is it going to be Aiden O'Connell at quarterback by that point in the year? Again, the Dolphins played him last year. Miami aided a lot of the points that got put on the board with self-inflicted wounds last year. Don't do that. Don't be too and scramble and fumble and give the Raiders ball in plus territory and give them 3 points. Don't come out to start the second half and have a turnover and set the Raiders up on a short field. Right? Like, you don't do those things, you win that game comfortably. So that's a game I expect the Dolphins to win. They also lost the entire right side of their offensive line and Josh Jacobs. The Jets at home. You've had recent success at a high degree against the Jets. It's late enough in the year where some of their players, for all the injury discussion points that happen with the Dolphins, the Jets are a team that has a lot of talent that has some of those same questions. And I don't think it is unreasonable to expect at minimum a split with the New York Jets this season. So the Jets make it on that list as well. So 3 layups, games that you have to win. And if they don't, it really hurts. You're going to have to really work to make up that ground elsewhere. Both Patriots games in Arizona. 6 games that at minimum you need to go 2 out of every 3 on. So at least 4 wins out of this bucket. Jacksonville, Seattle, Tennessee, Las Vegas, Indianapolis, and home against the New York Jets. The rest of the schedule sits in the a la carte bucket. We're going to talk about that next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is sponsored by LinkedIn Jobs. If when you're hiring for your small businesses, you want to find the right quality professionals that are right for your roles. And that's why you check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else. Even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking in LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong places. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses could a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. So you have a pretty big menu of a la carte games this year. I'm not a math guy, but I know you got 3 in one bucket and 6 in the other. That's 9, and there's 17 games. You got 8 games in the a la carte bucket. There's a lot of flexibility, especially if you sweep the first 2 buckets. If you go 6 for 6 and you go 3 for 3, that's the scenario in which you can really put yourself in position to have all those home playoff games that we're talking about the Dolphins need in order to have success late in the year. Now, the gauntlet at the end of the year, from a regular season perspective, including the final 4 games, that's all in the a la carte bucket. So that's the good news, is I don't think there's a single game here on the schedule that sat in the layups or should win bucket that's any later than week 11, week 12. I want to make sure I get that right. So we're going to visit my favorite website on the planet, playoffpredictors.com. The Dolphins schedule, Dolphins home against Jets is week 14, excuse me. Then you have Patriots home versus Patriots week 12 and home versus Raiders week 11. So you do have some games that dip into the middle third quarter, early fourth quarter of the season schedule. But a lot of this, you're going to have a feel for just how big the opportunity is for Miami by that Thanksgiving game against Green Bay. You're kind of going to know, like, hey, they can really make a run here if they can win some of these competitive games, including a game against Green Bay that sits on the schedule as an a la carte game. Both games against Buffalo, I have it as a la carte games because it'd be very easy for me to say, hey, you got to win 4 games in the division to give yourself a chance to win the division. They did that last year. They didn't win the division. They had a chance to, but they needed 5. So I chose to kind of omit the divisional breakout here and instead say it's both Bills games at Rams on Monday Night Football. And their defense, there's a lot of questions around that defense for the Rams. They'll be able to score points, no question. A lot of questions for the defense, though. At Green Bay, at Houston, home against San Francisco, at Cleveland, at New York Jets. Those 8 games is where you're going to, I think, determine whether you are an 8-9 or 9-8 team, which I don't have that expectation for who you're going to be as a team this year, to an 11-win team, to potentially a 12-win team, right? Like, that's, I think, where the wiggle room comes, because I do think they take care of business in those first 2 buckets. Do I think they maybe sweep the should win bucket? Probably not, but I think you at least go 5-1, which means you're 8-1 through those games. So now you got 8 games on the schedule with 8 wins already to your name. Can you go 4-4? Because if you go 4-4 and you go 8-1 in the other 9 games you play on the schedule, you're talking about a 12-win football team. And 2 of those games are at home, where you're tough out at home. Now, they're against Buffalo and San Francisco, but at least San Francisco's coming cross country. At least Buffalo's coming on a short week. You have variables for both of those games to say, hey, they have things at their advantage, but you got to go out and do it, right? I think at minimum, I do think they get at minimum 3 games out of this a la carte bucket, which means if you have the margin for error and you don't live up to expectations in the should win bucket, say you win your layups and say you go 3-3. Then you get at least 3 wins out of the a la carte bucket, which is what I think the probable outcome is for Miami. You're still looking at 9 wins. It's still going to put you in it at the end of the year. It's just a question of taking care of business the way that you're supposed to. Because if you do that, I think you're in a hierarchy of 11 wins again, or potentially more this year. So I hope that's put some perspective on not just like, hey, here's the schedule, it's a race to this many wins. but also kind of the magnitude of the games as far as what they mean to your expectations. A Week 13 loss on a short week on Thanksgiving in Lambeau against the Packers wouldn't hurt the Dolphins and their outlook for this season half as much as a home loss to Arizona at 1 p.m. in Week 8 would. Maybe that makes it more stressful. Maybe it makes it less stressful to know when you're playing Arizona, hey, really banking on this win for your big picture outlook. Whether how you choose to interpret that is up to you. But I know a lot of people liked hearing this kind of composition of the games on the schedule as far as how important they are for Miami reaching their wins goals this year. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. We get any extra news coming your way, we will be sure to check in and talk about it. And if not, then you will hear from me tomorrow night after the Dolphins Week 2 preseason contest against the Washington Commanders. So keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. I'm out of here.